Good afternoon. Welcome to Tuesday's Lunch and Learn. I'm Marcy Mowry, the president of the Pennsylvania Parks and Forest Foundation. And with me today are Roy Brubaker, district forester for the Michaux Forest District, and John Schwartzer, service forester for Cumberland and Franklin counties. Thank you, John and Roy, for joining me. For those new to the Lunch and Learns, if you have a question that you'd like to ask of our panelists, you can post it in the comment section, and I will be sure to address the question at the appropriate time throughout the presentation. So we're super excited today to be talking about the Michaux State Forest. For those who aren't familiar where the Michaux State Forest is located, but maybe we should start with that. So Roy, do you want to?
Sure. So Michaux State Forest is in the south central part of Pennsylvania, right along the Mason-Dixon line. And the forest itself is on the small ecoregion called the South Mountain ecoregion, which is one of the physiographic provinces of Pennsylvania. It's the northern terminus of the Blue Ridge Mountain that runs all the way down into Georgia and is sort of the front line of the Appalachian Mountain Range coming off of the Piedmont.
It's a very popular forest, the Michaux State Forest. Why do you think that is? What makes it so popular?
Well, there's a number of factors, and I'll cover a couple of them, and then John's been doing some of our forest monitoring over the past couple months, so he can cover some of the other ones. The mountain or the forest lies in the Cumberland Valley of Pennsylvania, so there's quite it's a rural but a fairly densely rural population right around the forest, literally right up to the forest boundary. We have lots of development interest and pressure right around the forest, as well as some Pennsylvania population centers like Harrisburg, Gettysburg, Carlisle, and Chambersburg, all within easy sort of day use driving distance of the forest. And then there's also the large metropolitan areas in DC and Maryland, DC, Baltimore areas that are only about 2 hours away. So for a weekend, getaway, it's within striking distance. Quite a lot of people.
Do you have an estimate of how many people use the forest or the potential use of the forest?
Yeah, I mean, right now, I don't know, what is your data showing, John? I mean, our parking areas recently have been pretty full. So what would you say on a day-to-day basis when the sun is shining? What are we running?
To give you a total number, I have no idea. But in the parking lots, most of our parking lots have been at capacity at some point during the week. So they're completely full. So it wouldn't be unusual to see 50 vehicles in a parking lot.
And we have an estimate from the recreation use monitoring data, which I think that data was collected about 4 years ago. And it was based on an annual sampling method. So it wasn't looking at maximum use or minimum use, but it estimated about 330 visitors to the state forest per year. 330,000 visitors per year. So in terms of comparing it to other state forest districts, it's right about the same as the Sproul, which is our largest state forest. And if you put it as a person per acre basis, we're about almost 90,000 acres, and the Sproul is over 300,000 acres. So in terms of the amount of people per acre of forest land, we're definitely one of the most densely used forests out there.
Yeah, that sounds like it could be very different. What are people doing? What is the recreational opportunities within the Michaux?
Do you want to take that one, Roy?
Yeah, well, I can speak generally, and then John can maybe say a little bit about sort of what we've seen in this recent sort of new discovery of the forest land that the COVID pandemic has kind of confronted us with. So the other thing that makes the Michaux somewhat unique is it's a large block of land. It's almost 140 square miles, all pretty much put together in one block. So, and then within that block, there's a lot of what I would call like microsite attractions. So we have a reservoir, we have some nice rock climbing sites. We have three state parks, two state parks, an environmental education center that create a lot of sort of site-specific interests for the public. we have a public target range, and we have an ATV trail system. So when you put sort of all of those microsite amenity values into a big contiguous area of forest land with a lot of trails, a lot of road access, a lot of vistas, it supports sort of a huge portfolio of recreational opportunities, everything from ultra marathons and motocross events to, people that are hiking the Appalachian Trail as through hikers coming up, from either down south or up north. So we also have the AT bisecting the entire forest. So it kind of just creates this huge sucking sound for a lot of recreational interests, both spontaneous and planned.
Yeah, and I never really thought about the fact that you are a contiguous forest, whereas in many forest districts, they have tracts of land spread out over, multiple counties.
Yeah, and that's kind of what's hard to get people to understand, that we even our population density around us is not at the highest level of population density when you compare it to all tracts of forest land. But when you compare it just to large contiguous tracts, say 50,000 acres or more, something that you would need to do like an ultra marathon or a marathon or a 2-day mountain bike race or something like that. When you just look at those tracts of land of 50,000 acres or more, we pop out as a total outlier in terms of our demographic context.
Okay. And John, what are you seeing in some of your use monitoring as it relates to recreational uses?
So one of the most popular that I'm seeing is definitely hiking, and then probably mountain biking is probably definitely close to tied with hiking. And water sports, we have a reservoir that's located on the forest, and I think a majority of the people in the one parking lot were in the water on some kind of a craft, paddling around and having a good time. Horseback riding. The rifle range has been closed, but I think if it was open, it would be a pretty popular destination also. But yeah, there's quite a lot of use, and it's people just walking on the roads, on the trails. They're everywhere. Fishing, mushroom hunting. I saw a couple people picking mushrooms. It's just a wide variety of activity.
Yeah, and actually, from the recreational use monitoring, actually just driving our state forest roads is the number one activity, I think, in the rec use monitoring. It's something you often don't think about as a recreational activity, but we have a lot of road miles and a lot of people using those roads just to get out and drive through the forest.
Yes, and I think that studies have found that road driving is like the third most popular activity in Pennsylvania in terms of how people get outside. Is they drive the forest roads, they take these scenic drives. And in fact, a friend of mine, that's what they did for Easter. They took a drive on Ridge Road and enjoyed Hammond's Rocks. They really, they found this great gem. So you have a lot of visitors to the Michaux Forest. What does this mean for the forest, and what does this mean for your staff to have this large influx of visitors on a fairly regular basis?
Well, I think one of the things, and it's not just the staff now, but all along, it's one of the things that's really hard to kind of, or that you have to kind of keep in mind to understand the impacts on the staff, is that our use, the use of the forest is really supported on the past use history of the forest. So we have, part of the reason we have so many roads and trails is that this forest was used, had a really, really long settlement history compared to other forests. And in fact, a lot of other forests in Pennsylvania were cut for charcoal and were timbered at one time. This forest was really cut for charcoal production alone almost for a century. So when you think about the level of infrastructure and industrial complexes across the forest, there were 5 iron forges. Some of those iron forges, like Pine Grove Furnace, was in operation for over a century, and a lot of that period was completely fueled by charcoal production from the forest itself. So you have this lattice work of trails and old haul roads, old charcoal hearth roads that make the forest incredibly accessible, not just by car or four-wheel drive, but by foot traffic, by bike traffic, by equestrian traffic. And so so it's a really permeable forest, and we're trying to manage use and access to that landscape based on all of this sort of unplanned extractive trail infrastructure. So I think for us as managers, one of the hardest things is to figure out how to balance the fact that the forest is full of these recreational attributes and values that people want to get to. It's incredibly accessible because of old traces and old trails and the road network through it. And it's had a long history of use across the whole forest system. And so expectations are high for people to have access and be able to get where they want to go. So when you put all of those variables together, it makes it we're in the middle of trying to figure out really how to manage it as a system, that we can meet both visitor expectations. People that don't know the forest like the back of their hand can know where they can get, what the values are out there that they might want to go and see, and that they have a sustainable trail or road or parking lot system to help them get there. So I think that, in a nutshell, that's kind of what it means for our staff, is that we have to deal with acute use expectations and pressures on a system that was really never designed to do anything other than get material off the mountain or from the mountain down to the forge.
I understand. And when you were mentioning all of the history, I know one of the very popular spots is looking at the Civilian Conservation Corps history. Can you talk about that for just briefly? Because you have some interesting remnants of that in the forest.
Yeah, and it's really interesting how the Conservation Corps history kind of came in and sort of nested right on top. I mean, there were a couple different concentration or civilian conservation camps, but the most historic one was one at Camp Michaud that was right next to Pine Grove Furnace. So it was basically built right into the ag and village infrastructure of the one iron forge, the longest lasting iron forge on the mountain. And yeah, it wasn't the first CCC camp, but it was one of the early ones. And it had, it got some additional historic value during the World War II because it was transitioned into use as a POW interrogation camp. And then following that, it transitioned into use as a church camp for quite a few years. So there's a lot of people that have been introduced ever since the 30s to the Michaux and to conservation, to the work of, the conservation history in Pennsylvania through that camp over, many, many years. And it's now a national, it's been nominated for a National Historic Site. There's an interpretive trail through it, a lot of interest in kind of visiting that site from people that were introduced to the forest from the church camp days, especially. So yeah, but a lot of the work that the Conservation Corps did was really sort of real basic forest restoration, getting trees planted, getting trails built, getting pavilions, getting basic recreation infrastructure in, so that people could use the forest. Can we stop and introduce Michelle now that she's joining us?
We can. Well, joining us is Michelle Blevins. Michelle is the Assistant District Forester at the Michaux State Forest. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you.
Glad you're able to join us.
Yep.
We were talking a lot about the recreational opportunities and recreational pressures in the Michaux. Can we spend a few minutes talking about the natural resources of the Michaux? I mean, you have an amazing forest. You have a lot of diversity in tree species. Can we share with the viewers a little bit about the natural resources of the forest?
Sure.
Do you want me to take that, or do you want to?
Yeah, go ahead, John.
Okay. So our forest is mostly an oak pine forest. It's a lot of fire adapted species. So the trees and shrubs that live there have survived many wildfires and natural fires that have occurred on South Mountain, and most of them are adapted for that. But we've kind of gone through a little bit of a transition where we've kind of eradicated wildfires for the most part for the last 70 years. And we've seen an influx of species that are less fire adapted coming in the gaps that are being left by the fire adapted species. So we've done a little bit of adaptive management with some wildfires, or some prescribed fires to help return that natural balance to the forest on South Mountain. But
Great.
It's a really neat forest for diversity.
It is beautiful.
And I think some of the things that make it really ecologically unique is that it is really a southern forest type. Again, coming up from the Blue Ridge, it's the very northern tip of the Blue Ridge. So between its connection to the southern forest types and then the way it lays in the landscape, it really serves as a bioreserve function for a lot of critical populations that are either unique sort of genetic resources, like our brook trout really are not closely related to other brook trout in the northern parts of the state.
I didn't know that.
So they have some very unique. We serve a very unique bioreserve function for things like brook trout, a lot of like ruffed grouse that doesn't migrate very far. It's kind of its last stronghold in the south central part of the state. And things like timber rattlesnakes, which are not connected to other Pennsylvania populations. So Pennsylvania as a whole tends to play a keystone role for a lot of species conservations, both plant and animal, between northern and southern latitudes in North America. And I would say that, the Michaux is kind of a microcosm of the role that the state as a play holds for biological conservation. And it's another recreational attraction. A lot of people come to the Michaux for birding or for fishing or for hunting and appreciating the natural aspects of it. So it's part of what draws people to the forest.
So how do you balance, as managers of the forest, how do you balance the recreational opportunities with your mission of managing for the natural resources of the forest?
I think that's a good one for Michelle to take, since she has to.
I was looking at her.
Well, it definitely is a balancing act, and what I can say is that we are currently trying to manage it. It is difficult because we do have a lot of sensitive ecosystems. We do have a lot of sensitive areas on the Michaux, and we do have a lot of use. We have people everywhere. They're going, and the forest is open to the public. So, and we're still working on things. We're still coming up with our plans. We're still coming up with our strategies on how to balance managing the forest, because it is a working forest, and learning how to manage the forest, but also share the forest with the public, and how the public can interact with the forest in positive ways too, and how they can properly use the forest so that they can kind of coexist, because everybody should get outside. Everybody should enjoy and appreciate nature, but also appreciate how much effort goes into managing these forests too. So
I think you lead to my next question, and I see Pam's putting up some pictures. And that is, I think for the most part, people want to be good stewards. I mean, they love these places in the landscape. So what advice would you give to people in terms of how to be a good steward or a good visitor to the Michaux State Forest, or to any state forest for that matter?
How to be a good steward is to come and enjoy the forest for its beauty and for its natural elements, and to just take in your surroundings, and take a nice hike or watch the birds and listen to the sounds, take pictures, but leave nothing but your footprints. Don't leave your trash. Don't leave your spray paint. Don't cut all the vegetation and just make trails wherever you want to go. Keep your vehicles on, the roads open to the public, and just enjoy the forest for the beauty.
Somebody posted a question, that sometimes when they're out visiting, they're picking up trash and they end up with several bags full of it. Is there any place that if visitors are picking up litter that has been left behind, where they can leave it to be picked up, or do they need to take it with them?
The best option would be for them to take it with them, but if they can't do that, then it would be good to put it at a road intersection and then give our office a call so that we know that it's there, and we don't assume that it's someone dumping a bag of trash along the road.
Yeah, big
And I'd like
difference.
to put out an advisory. If people would like to come out and volunteer, they can sign up as a conservation volunteer, so that they can, be added to our volunteer list, so we can communicate with them and let them know when we're having community work days. And also, we do appreciate all the help cleaning up our forest. We cover a lot of ground with very few people, and help is appreciated. So we would recommend or ask that people sign up as conservation volunteers, even if they just want to do a good deed like picking up trash along the roadsides, because trash can be hazardous along the roadsides too. So I just want to let people know that they need to be careful and wear gloves and be careful of what they're picking up.
Yes. Well, that leads me to I feel like I paid you to do my segues, Michelle. My next comment was, we often say as PPFF that it takes a village to manage a state park or state forest. So can you describe what the village is that's needed for the Michaux? Who all, in addition to your staff, who all is engaged in helping you, and how can, in addition to conservation volunteers, what can people do?
Well, people can do a lot of things to help their, local forest or park. You can sign up as a conservation volunteer and help us out when we set up community work days. But we also have started a friends group too. You can become a member of a friends group of different forests and parks throughout Pennsylvania. And that way you can help out with just about everything that goes on the forest, whether it's picking up trash, or it's brushing trails, or it's helping with wildlife openings, or if it's just helping us distribute positive messages to, the public about what's going on the forest. There's so many ways that people can use the forest, appreciate the forest, volunteer on the forest, and help us do our jobs on a daily basis.
Marcy, I'd like to add a couple components there. A lot of people that visit state parks and forests often don't realize how dependent we are as an agency on local volunteer ambulance and volunteer fire companies for visitor safety and for search and rescue and for wildfire suppression. And a lot of our volunteer fire company and ambulance crews, they're critical visitor use infrastructure for us that we depend on, and they're also funded largely by contributions and fundraising, and they haven't been able to do their fundraising through the COVID pandemic. So there are another set of groups that hopefully people, if they live in an area that are serviced by volunteer fire companies and ambulance crews, hopefully they're supporting their local crew. But it's also something for people to think, if they're visiting from outside the area in a rural area like ours that are so dependent on those services, to think about making a donation to a local volunteer fire company. The other organizations that really help us a lot to meet some of the use demands are things like the Fish and Boat Commission, Pennsylvania Game Commission, our surrounding state parks. Keep Pennsylvania Beautiful provides a lot of support on the trying to combat dumping, both through education and through enforcement. And I also want John to say a word, because John's work, he does a lot of work on the state forest, but he also provides education and outreach opportunities for communities around the forest, and particularly, forest landowners. And we often think about the public lands as, what people want to come and see, but a lot of our quality of life, especially in our rural areas, is also supported by private landowners. And John and other service forests provide a really critical link between our surrounding communities. So, John, would you want to say a little bit about some of the programs you do?
So as a service forester, like Roy said, I work off of state forest as well. And in Pennsylvania, we have 2.2 million acres of state forest, but there's 17 million acres of forest. So there's a large proportion of that forest that is not under the management of foresters like Michelle and her crew. So it's my job to provide technical assistance to landowners who want to manage their forests sustainably. And I take calls all the time for there you go. For the services that we offer, it's If you want to do a timber sale, you can give us a call, and we come out and we take a walk with you and get an idea of what your objectives are and try to help you move towards that objective. And also education and outreach to school groups, scout troops, senior citizen homes, speaking engagements, just to get the word out on sustainable forestry.
So if somebody wants to reach out to you, John, what's the best way to do that? Is to contact the forest district and say, hey, we have an educational opportunity, or I'm a forested landowner?
Yep, that's the best way. Give us a call or send us an email at fdo1@pa.gov.
Excellent.
The other set of services that John provides is actually an urban forestry and tree vitalization, urban and community tree vitalization program. And I guess the connection I wanted to make is that, we really want people to come and enjoy their public lands, but we really want people's enjoyment and stewardship of forests to be something they take home with them too, and to figure out how to make, their neighborhoods, their communities, their schools, their surroundings a little bit more like the forest. So that we really try to engage people across the continuum that forests can bring into their lives.
Yep, urban tree canopy is pretty important. A lot of cities are doing revitalization programs, and there are grants available to townships and municipalities to help them plant trees or maintain the trees that they already have along their streets.
Yeah, they're very important, and that makes me think we should probably have a conversation at some point on riparian forested areas, because that's very important to water quality. Yeah. And we had a speaker a few weeks ago who talked about forest therapy and how spending time in nature can help to reduce your stress and improve your overall wellness. Yep. I do want to share a question that has popped up, and I'm going to read it verbatim. How is the statewide shortage in manpower affecting your ability to manage the forest and parks? And in these aspects, how could the public help?
I have one comment on that. If I can jump in here, Roy, while you get your thoughts together. So we have a very limited number of law enforcement officers in the forest, and if you see something happening, if you can take down information and give us a call, that would help us out a lot. There's so many eyes and ears out there right now that we never had before, and if you are all just good witnesses and don't put yourself in any danger and just get information, we definitely appreciate any help we can get. I hand my card out to people all the time when I'm driving around doing my monitoring in our bad areas where I know that there's a lot of dumping problems. I say, you see somebody, take down a license plate, give me a call.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Very good advice. Roy, did you want to add anything?
Well, yeah, and I guess the first thing I would say is I think I am uniquely lucky to work on the Michaux, because I have been consistently amazed at no matter how tight the complement network gets, we seem to have staff that figure out how to rise to the challenge and almost, and do just a tremendous amount of work, even when we're kind of coming apart at the seams. So, that's just a couple examples. John mentioned the lack of ranger coverage, and this especially this closure and some of the use pressures hit us at an especially thin time, because we were transitioning some of our ranger positions. We were actually down to about 1.5 rangers for several weeks during some really, really heavy use pressure. And in spite of that, some of the organizational networks, Pam and Marcy, the stuff that PPFF has done in cleaning up Hammond's Rocks, helping to organize the goodwill of surrounding communities, even on a microsite basis, but at a forest level basis with Friends Group. There's a tremendous amount of care in Pennsylvania communities for making sure that good things happen, no matter how scarce the resources get to do that. And I think, long term, we do need to think about where are we putting our public treasure, where are we putting our tax dollars, and are we putting it into things that improve lives, not just for the current generation, but for future generations, like the CCC era did for us. Those are really important public investments. So I don't want to minimize the role of advocacy and political kind of support for public investments in natural resources and public lands, because it's absolutely critical. We would not be here if 100 years ago people didn't start acquiring lands and hiring people and creating systems that we now are a part of and can provide benefits to others. But at the same time, there is always this role for I think, more efficient and engaged and aligned community resources around the things that really matter in our day. So I think it's a combination of, and I think we can leverage both of those energies. I think if we do a better job of aligning the community of care around our forests and our special natural places, I think the public revenues will come back to them too.
Yeah, and I think you hit on an important point, and that is the advocacy and that users, when they let their elected officials know how important these places are and how they're benefiting them in so many different ways, that makes a huge difference. I just had a thought and it went right out. Don't you just hate when that happens?
Well, I want to say one more thing, and maybe Michelle can build on it a little bit, because it really, she has really helped me understand the value. Michelle manages our roads, trails, recreational infrastructure, all of our maintenance crews, and our recreation foresters, and she has really helped me understand the value of not just fixing problems, but redesigning the infrastructure that we have so that it is both ecologically and socially more efficient and valuable. And I'd like Michelle to say a few words about some of the unique challenges that she has already begun to face by addressing infrastructure issues on both our roads and our trails, so that when we do things that people really, really like and want to take care of.
Sure, Michelle.
Well, I guess just to build on that, and that goes back to probably one of the questions that you asked me earlier of how do we balance our use and how we manage the forest, is that, and I said that we're working on it. We're coming up with strategies, and that's some of the strategies is better laid out road systems, more sustainable road systems that can handle our increased use, and better laid out trail systems so that, we still have something that the public will come and enjoy and use, but they're also in the right spots and they're sustainable and they're manageable. And we haven't really done that in the past. I don't think we've put the kind of protocols that we have in place now into our thought processes on, constructing these things, but we're starting to now. We're looking at it at a greater scale, at a larger landscape. And we want to take into account what people want to come and use and where they want to go on the forest, and get them there, but in a sustainable, balanced way, so that we can still manage the forest, and, the species and the wildlife that live here too. And so that we can all kind of coexist and maintain a healthy forest all together.
Which is another great reason for people to sign up to be a conservation volunteer, because as you expand that trail network, you're going to need volunteers, either through working with the Friends of Michaux or working with the Forest District directly. So I believe Pam shared the link for people who are interested in signing up to become a conservation volunteer. It came back to me several times throughout the presentation. You mentioned forest dumping. Can we talk about what this is and why it's bad for the forest, and so we can educate people not to do it, or to alert you if they see somebody doing it?
I would love to take this one, if you guys don't mind.
Please, John.
It is a passion of mine to go after people that dump in our forest. So forest dumping is when you take your bag of trash and you drive out into the forest and you throw it along the side of the road. And it's not acceptable and it's illegal. And there's two kinds of dumping. So we have either trash dumping or yard waste dumping. And yard waste dumping people don't see as a problem, but there are several reasons why it's not acceptable in our forest. The plants that you're dumping are probably diseased or dead, and you remove them from your yard because they were diseased or dead, and they were probably killed by something. And we don't want that infectious
Good point.
organism or fungus to get into our forest, because it could possibly spread to our natural areas. The other reason is that a lot of the landscaping plants that we use in our yards and gardens are not native to Pennsylvania, and some of them can be highly invasive. So when you dump them out in the woods, you're not removing the seeds and the fruit from those before you put them in our forest, and they spread. And I can take you to a dump site that probably hasn't been used in 40 years, but there's trees there that don't belong there, and they came from someone's yard waste. I'm pretty sure of it. And that is why you don't really want to dump leaves, grass, and if you don't want it in your yard, we don't want to see it on our forest either. So there's quite a few reasons why dumping is really bad for our forest, and I can go on and on and on about this.
Yes, and I think, as you mentioned earlier, you take down information if you see somebody doing it, take down a license plate, but don't confront people.
Nope.
Contact the forest district and give them the information.
Yep, we have rangers. They carry guns. They can go out and contact them, and don't put yourself in danger.
Yes, that's important. The other thing that I wrote, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Can I just say a word? I think the thing that is the most disturbing about the dumping is that, getting back to that constrained complement. To my mind, one of the saddest things is that we have really, really talented people that have been trained in species conservation, recreation management, a whole bunch of valuable public services that spend a huge amount of their time just cleaning up after people who either don't care or are just willing to be very selfish in how they deal with, the most basic human needs that we have of getting rid of waste. And that's what's frustrating. And the most frustrating to me is the huge opportunity cost on a forest like ours, where we have so many other things that we could do with our time while we're here on the forest to serve the public in a way that really matters and helps reset more positive trend lines on really critical issues of both conservation and recreation. So it's a huge issue. And it's the other thing I wanted to say is it's a policy issue, because John mentioned the dumping that is largely the individual, the residential dumping, but we also have a lot of what I call commercial dumping, and that those are ones that it's not just a bag of trash or a small pickup load of brush, but it's a whole dump truck load of tires or of construction waste. And a lot of times when we prosecute these, the people that we actually prosecute are very low wage, low income people that are doing it as a service for a business that is getting a competitive edge by disposing of waste in a very illegal manner. And it's hard to prosecute back to the people that are actually causing the real problem in the marketplace. So there's also room for both local, county, and state government to think about our policies, our laws, and our the need for public investment in waste disposal, and I know regulation is a dirty word, but it is a very poorly regulated activity at the state level, and it puts the cost on an already constrained conservation natural resource management system.
Yeah, because it is a cost that you have to bear. In terms of when you're paying then to remove the trash or the construction materials, they have to go to the landfill at some point, and you bear that cost.
Yes.
Yes, and it's also, I'm sorry not to butt in on this either, but I guess it's all kind of a dumping is a thorn in all of our sides, because a lot of people come and they use the forest properly, and they come and they want to see this beautiful, pristine forest where they can come and breathe in fresh air and lower their stress, get some physical activity, enjoy the natural beauty of the forest. And then you drive up some of our roads, and you bring your kids and you bring your family out there to get them more in touch with nature, and all of a sudden you pass a big pile of garbage bags and broken furniture and mattresses and
carcasses and diapers
and baby diapers and all of this stuff that doesn't belong there, that someone took it upon themselves to think, I don't want to pay to dispose this, I'll just take this to my local forest and dump it, and someone will make it disappear for us. So it's not aesthetically pleasing to, the staff that love and maintain this forest, or the people that love and come and use the forest in the proper way. And just like, Roy said, it takes a lot of time. Our staff has to go and take up their staff hours that they could be doing something else on the forest to make it a better experience for the public. on our roads or on our trails or anything else like this or other infrastructure, but yet a lot of their time is spent going out and picking up someone else's garbage.
Yeah.
And then we also have to use our district funds that could go towards something better used for the public too, other than paying to dispose of someone else's garbage.
Yes, it's very frustrating, and having been in the Michaux helping to clean up litter, I've seen it firsthand. Some of the things that people dispose of. One other thing that I wrote down as we were talking, John, you mentioned people picking mushrooms. So since we put it out there, can we talk about what the guidelines are for doing that?
Yes, Michelle, you might have a better grasp of the regulations, but I believe if it's for personal use, you're enabled to pick mushrooms on state forest, not on state game lands or in state parks.
Mhm.
So
Okay.
it is an activity that a lot of people engage in. They won't tell you they're doing that most of the time because they don't want to give away their spots. But
Right.
yeah, it's a fun family activity that's growing in popularity, I think, in Pennsylvania.
And
Yeah.
we would just caution people to make sure you know your mushrooms.
Yes.
Be positive of your identification.
There's
So
a saying, there's the old mushroom hunters and the bold mushroom hunters. There are no old, bold mushroom hunters.
That's so true.
And it is limited to mushrooms, berries, and nuts. So if you get into harvesting edible plants, anything that requires destruction of the plant itself, then you need to get a plant collection permit from the
Okay.
district
Gotcha.
office. So there is a fine distinction. Mushrooms you're allowed to harvest, plants you can't. So like ramps, ginseng, any, even digging out a plant, any of that kind of stuff is against our rules and regs.
Okay, good.
Without
Glad
a permit.
we cleared
without
that
an
up
approved
for
permit.
people.
Yep.
'Cause again, I think most people want to follow the rules, but they need to understand what those guidelines are in order to make sure that they're abiding by the rules and regulations. We're coming to a close, and I know that John has to leave us, so I just want to open it up if you have any final words that you would like to share with the viewers.
I guess thank you for having us. And the Michaux is a beautiful, unique forest, and you are more than welcome to come and visit and use us and enjoy us as long as you come to recreate and get healthy and enjoy the beauty and serene nature of the forest. But please leave take your trash home with you and leave nothing but prints, and take only pictures or edible berries, but not the bush.
And if you're taking pictures, we'd encourage you to send them into our photo contest. John and Roy, anything you'd like to say as we close the session?
I would just like to say thank you for having me, and yeah, come out and enjoy your forest. You guys own it. It's yours.
It's a great resource.
Yeah.
And also, it's a good idea to review the rules and regulations that are posted at every parking area. That helps understand what the rules are, so you know what you can and can't do, and you can avoid some problems.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And have a district forest map or one of the purple lizard Michaux maps, because that'll tell you the trails that are designated trails, and it's important to stay on those designated trails in order to protect the asset.
Yeah. I'll just add a big thank you, Marcy and Pam, for everything that PPFF does. I'm thrilled with our friends group. Please join our friends group if you care about the Michaux. They're getting off the ground, and this pandemic hasn't helped our forward movement, but we have a fantastic leadership group and sort of nucleus of members there that are really helping us a lot. So just thanks for all that you do to support parks and forests and conservation, and for putting together these kinds of opportunities to engage. So really
You're quite
appreciate
welcome.
everything you do.
You're welcome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I think this has been very informative. If we didn't get to a question that you had, if you didn't post it, if you feel free to post it afterwards, and we'll make sure that we circle back to Michelle and John and Roy and ask that question of them so that you can be fully informed. So thank you for joining us today, presenters, as well as viewers. We really appreciate your time and hope that this has been valuable and educational. I know I wrote some wrote a bunch of things down that were new to me, and I thought I knew the Michaux pretty well. So I learned something. So that was good. So
Marcy,
thank you.
one
Yes.
more comment. I put my email address in the comments box, the chat box. If you could share that with everyone, if they have any questions for me about service forestry or a site visit, then feel free to give me an email, and I'd be happy to contact them.
Yep, I'm sure Pam is going to do that in the background right now. There you go. There it appears. So that's John Schwartz. He is a service forester serving Cumberland and Franklin counties. So if you have a question for him, you can contact him there with his email address. So again, thank you so much, everyone. We really appreciate all of the three of you being here, and it was very informative.
Great.
Have a good one.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.